In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. Whatever the virtues in the many fields of knowledge, all are steps on the path of omniscience. May these arise in the clear mirror of intellect. O Manjushri, please accomplish this. Good evening and welcome. Can you hear me okay? Thank you all for joining in again. Everybody know everybody from last time or some other occasion? Cool. So tonight we forage out into the part two, the realizing the view, focusing on Yogacara tradition, the third major development of Buddhism in India after the Abhidharma tradition, and then the Madhyamaka tradition is the Yogacara tradition. And then we have the appearance of sutras focused on the Tathagata concept. And so we'll focus on that. And we also have this development of an effort to bring together the different types of Madhyamaka, and to some extent Madhyamaka and Yogacara, by a gentleman named Shantarakshita and some colleagues of his, which will be the third major trend that we'll focus on in this segment. So Yogacara, Tathagata, and a sort of synthesizers. And then a little peek on some later developments of Buddhism in India that are related to all of those at the very end of this segment. And first let's dive into, there were a couple of readings that were circulated as review of last course. One by Rupert Getland on the Abhidharma, and then one by a gentleman named Jan Westerhoff on emptiness and causation, point of dispute between Abhidharma and Madhyamaka. We got a couple of interesting responses to the second article, and I wonder if we could just talk generally about these. If people had a chance to read them, they're not sort of required, so to speak. But if anything interesting came up, starting with the Abhidharma, one more time going through the idea of the Abhidharma project, so to speak. Chris, do you want to say anything about that? Did that present anything different for you from the version we had from, I think, Naomi, Rowan?
Yeah, I think it was a little less technical than maybe what we encountered in our previous course, but I found that particular essay to be just like a really good flavor, a really good taste. It was clear, and gave a good sense without getting too into the weeds, which is so easy to do with the Abhidharma. In particular, I liked the passage on Abhidharma problems. And maybe that's me just revealing myself as the Madhyamakan, Madhyamaka.
You immediately want to have it lead into Madhyamaka.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of course that's our tendency, right? We encounter Abhidharma as almost like a cautionary tale. The school, the tradition that got it wrong, and are very quick to deploy our arguments against it. And in doing so, often miss out how much it has to offer us and how helpful it can be on the meditation cushion and in our lives. And I thought that there were some really great moments in that chapter that sort of make the case for at least certain aspects of Abhidharma.
That was great. Your little summary brought up a number of things for me, which so maybe we just open up the floor to other people, and then I'll come back to some of the issues that you just brought up or came to my mind. Anyone else have any reaction to that summary, revisiting, review? If not, I'll just dive in. So, for one, like the first thing you said is this tendency to immediately like look at the parts of Abhidharma that gradually or quickly become sort of contradictory or illogical, and how that leads to Madhyamaka. And it struck for me that most of us have been introduced to Abhidharma from teachers like Trungpa Rinpoche, who presented as basically Buddhist psychology, right, as a way of understanding the mind, and it focuses primarily on the five skandhas as a way of looking at the functioning of ego. And we don't ordinarily think of it as like leading into Madhyamaka necessarily. But as soon as we then study it like philosophically, it does that. It has that very different flavor, and I think it's unavoidable. Any other reactions to that? But like like two issues. One is it leading into Madhyamaka, but the other is um, I've always found it very curious that when you say Abhidharma to like a student of Trungpa Rinpoche, it's like equivalent to the five skandhas, and there's just so much more to Abhidharma than that. And I wondered if other people had that experience who had been sort of brought up in Trungpa Rinpoche's world as Abhidharma being the way of understanding ego, and were sort of surprised to encounter all these other aspects of Abhidharma. And people are still in their holiday relaxation. And this is, if you're feeling like, oh, I didn't read the article, so I can't say anything, this actual issue that I'm bringing up is something totally divorced, so to speak, from the article. Just, I've been having conversations with some other, like, older students of Trungpa Rinpoche about Abhidharma and the way he taught, he being Trungpa Rinpoche. But I think it's pretty common with Dharma teachers these days that Abhidharma in the Tibetan tradition is taught as like Buddhist psychology for understanding ego. Any reactions to that?
Well, I guess just a small one in that I was recently I've been reading some old, what do you call them, Shambhala Suns or Lion's Roars, and it's just some old articles. And there was one that was a little series on I guess, the three baskets. And so and so when I read the one on the Abhidharma, so it was coming from a completely different perspective, more from, I guess, probably a Theravadan type, a Western Theravadan type practitioner. And it was so, she seemed to convey so much delight in the way in which Abhidharma can elucidate, the workings of mind, but not just from the skandha's point of view, but much more, you know, just the whole experiential quality of what are the elements that arise in any moment of, let's say, virtuous thought, or any moment of non-virtuous thought, or any, that you can get very experiential about it, and that it really had a very path quality. And I was thinking, like, yeah, that's a very different flavor than most people think about Abhidharma.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Yeah, similar reaction. Thank you. Chris, do you have any thoughts on this? Your reaction to this?
One thing that was discussed in the essay was the Abhidharma creating sort of a shared vocabulary by which different meditators can compare their experience. And it's sort of tempting to you sit down on your cushion and sort of go inward and assume that what's going on is completely your own thing. Often it is, but having a frame.
I think he's frozen in the 23rd mental factor.
Maybe we're having a shared experience of that.
Chris,
Yeah, I don't know where I
he's
cut
back.
out. Yeah, sorry.
Did,
And maybe gone again.
Like he's having a brain fart.
maybe maybe get rid of your video
Yeah, you
and
may have to
just do the
drop the
audio.
video.
Anyway, I'm a Chris, so I can talk.
Exactly.
um,
I saw you reacting when I said Chris. Please do.
yeah, uh, yeah. It was interesting. I did find a lot of little things I didn't realize were associated with the Abhidharma, like Alaya Vishnana, and and I got to finally get the answer on Maitreya that there's two thoughts. One that he really did exist, and the other just a bodhisattva for a sangha. And I was like, that's what I wanted to know. It's taken me this long to find it. Just one sentence. I'm like, yeah, that's what I keep wondering.
I
But yeah, there
love
was
that.
lots of stuff like that.
Just a bodhisattva. Yeah, so we'll get into that, this idea of like who actually was Maitreya or is Maitreya. That's neat. What anything else there, Chris? I cut you off. I sort of jumped in. Chris
No,
did.
that was it. Yeah, just lots of stuff like that.
Cool. And then Chris Wilcox, back to you. Did you switch or do something you're more stable?
I moved my router, which may make things better.
So I
You
can't
can tell
thank
me
you.
if
Yeah,
it
we'll
does or
see.
doesn't.
I
We've
can't
been
remember
over
your.
break. I've been kind of like tinkering with the Wi-Fi system that I thought made improvements, but maybe didn't. So we're out here in the desert, so it's internets
Mm,
can be a little tricky.
mhm.
I'm not sure where I cut off earlier, but the point that I was trying to make was that the Abhidharma gives us a language by which we can share our meditation experience with our peers and our teachers in a way that can be very helpful in terms of clarifying that experience.
Exactly. Case in point, I wanted to. What I one of the things I liked about this article is it went into this thing that's called uh, sort of called conditional relations in Abhidharma world, which is this idea of what mental factors arise with what other mental factors, based on like what kind of consciousness you're having. And it's a part of Abhidharma that I find that we rarely see addressed in our world of Abhidharma, and it's addressed in the more traditional Theravadan versions, but mostly on a more advanced level. But it's in this article on, let's see, page 214 and all. I was gonna screen share it, I think. Here we go. Oh, so for one, I love this where finally we get to see like there's two versions of Abhidharma that exist still today, of apparently many of the Abhidharma texts, but There's one version that attributes the texts to the Buddha, the Theravada version, and these are the names of them. Enumeration of the Dhammas, Dhammasangini, and Jnana Prasthana of Katyayana, so different, attributed to different authors, Arhats, the foundation of knowledge. And apparently the contents of the books are fairly similar, even though the titles and authorship and so forth is different. But it's just fascinating to me that there's two completely distinct different versions of what the Abhidharma texts are. And then let's see down here. Oh, sorry. I'm screwed up as usual. Here. So there's a total of 52 types of associated mental factors. We're all familiar with, I think, the mental factors at this point, the 52, which includes, by the way, skandhas 2, 3, and 4, feeling, discrimination, and then formation has the rest of the 52. Only certain combinations of these are possible. For example, it's possible for the mental factors of greed and aversion to arise together in the same moment, for the simple reason that it's impossible for greed and aversion to arise in the same moment. It's not possible to want something and not want it in the same moment. This does not, of course, mean that we cannot want something one moment and not want it the next. For the Theravada, the simplest kind of consciousness that can occur involves 7 associated mental factors. More complex consciousnesses involve up to a maximum of 36 types of associated mental factor. The Theravada version tabulates a system of 89 basic classes of consciousness. And you'll see this referred to here and there, this 89 classes of consciousness based on possible combinations of consciousnesses and associated mental factors. So they take them 52 mental factors and they matrix them against consciousness of the desire, form, and formless realms. So normal human consciousness involves 45 of these classes. Of the other 44, 18 concern the mind that has attained ordinary jnana, either as meditation, jnana practice, or being reborn into one of the Brahma worlds by virtue of having achieved jnana in a prior lifetime. 8 concern the mind that has attained transcendent jnana, at the moment of attaining one of the paths and fruits of stream entry. So then there's, I said like desire, form, and formless, and I'm not quite accurate there. It's more like desire, form, and formless, and then past consciousness. Consciousness that's enjoyed only by people that have attained stream entry, which for us is equivalent to a path of seeing and above. And then 18 are restricted to the consciousness of one who is awakened Buddha, or Arhat. The 45 classes of normal fall into 4 broad groups: rootless, unwholesome, wholesome, and karmic results of wholesome consciousness. So they have this whole other scheme of looking at the mental factors and how they sort of matrix with the types of consciousness. And honestly, I don't really understand this system very well, but my vague understanding is that they use this as a way of practicing developing wholesome states of consciousness by cultivating factors that support wholesome states of mind. And when they encounter states of, or factors of consciousness or mental factors that are unwholesome in a small way, they immediately recognize that and sort of use the antidote of their opposite in order to avoid a full-blown episode of anger or whatever, greed. That's just scratching the surface, I think. But this is a major aspect of Abhidharma that we really have no exposure to in our tradition. According to another Abhidharma classification, those whose practice is unpleasant and who take a long time to come to understanding, and those whose practice is unpleasant but come to understanding quickly, or pleasant practice, understand slowly, practice is pleasant but come to understand quickly. By reference to Abhidharma, it's essentially the same point as made by my buddy Bronkhorst on the basis of historical knowledge. The Buddhist path aims for the cultivation of happy and balanced states of mind as the basis for gaining of the understanding that liberates the mind. So it's sort of supporting the whole scheme of the, what you might call the Theravada or Abhidharma path of conduct, meditation, and wisdom, and how conduct or proper building up a positive karma, positive meritorious state of being lays the foundation for for successful and speedy meditation practice. Then this whole thing of process and process freed is another whole aspect that we don't often see. This complicated aspect. And then, as Chris said, the Abhidharma problems, and I think he did a good job laying those out, except he doesn't list them. I was hoping, could you just edit this and put in some subheaders that gives you a list of what are the problems that he identified. It's like karma, rebirth, and the issues related to that, like how does karma happen from a mechanical point of view, particularly without ego, and same with rebirth. And then he gets into the whole thing of how that intersects with the notion of things existing throughout time. And we saw that whole issue of the Sarvastivadin view of things existing in all three times and how bizarre that was. But for them, it explained how karma impacts from the past, impacts the present and the future. Anyway, so that was the first of two articles, and then the second review article was on Yamaka, and does causation entail emptiness, a point of dispute of Abhidharma. Chris, you want to lead us into that one, and then we'll get into some of the main issue that was raised by one of our colleagues.
Sure. Yeah, so this is a sort of an interesting it takes a very specific case of causation and how that is conceived of by both Abhidharma and Madhyamaka, and then sort of plays out a debate between those two in a way that sort of mutually clarifies both positions, kind of beyond just the question of causality, and really shows how those two systems view the world. I thought it was really interesting and helpful. As thinking about it in terms of review was interesting and helpful beyond sort of the specific arguments being made. So
there was a reference to something like a human view of things and a non.
Yeah, Humean view of causal regularity.
I have it handy if you wanted to show any part of it on screen. But
yeah, I just pulled it up.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's let's see, we got 5 sections here. The first talks about the Abhidharma's conception of intrinsic nature. So this is something that came up a lot in our previous class. But for the Abhidharma project is very much about breaking composite entities into individual objects on which they're based. So we looked at the questions of Melinda in one of our first classes last time, in which we have the famous example of the chariot. Uh, and Melinda asked the king if he rode here on the chariot. The king said, of course I did. And then Melinda proceeds to break down what exactly do you mean when you say the chariot? Is it the axles? Is it the wheel? Is it the seat? And in doing so, seeks to make the point that there is no such thing as a chariot as such, merely a composite of different parts. And then goes on to extend that same type of argument to persons. So not only is there no chariot, there's no Melinda, there's no king. Um, and this is sort of the mechanism of the Abhidharma project of taking composite things and breaking them down into their component pieces. And within the Abhidharma ontology, things do reach a point at which they cannot be broken down any further. And that point is called the dharmas. And reality is said to be made up out of these dharmas. Um, so in order for something to be a dharma, it has to satisfy two criteria. And I want to use Westerhoff's language here. Um, it has to it has to have resilience. This is what he says, and I'm on page 69. Uh, it has to be resilient against material or conceptual decomposition. So
You know what,
material,
Chris, just to interrupt for a second.
yeah,
It turns out, at least in the version that I have, that every page is page 69.
that is true. I'm seeing that. Okay, so this is page two of
So it's
18.
2 of 18. Thank you.
Two of 18. Wow, every page is page 69. That feels like some sort of joke. Um, so two particularly important ones, criteria. Two particularly important criteria an object has to fulfill in order to be deemed as existing by intrinsic nature are resilience against material or conceptual decomposition. So material decomposition is what we were just exploring in terms of the the chariot. It can be broken down into different pieces. We could take that even further and say those pieces could be broken down into smaller pieces. And end up with something that looks like an atomistic account. So the chariot's made out of different parts. One part is a wheel. The wheel is made of different parts, spokes and a hub and metal. And then, each one of those could be broken down until, in theory, you reach sort of the bottom, where you have little atom of wood that can't be broken down any further on a material level. We will, according to the Abhidharma system, we can break that down further conceptually. So you have your little wood atom, and that's composed of different combinations of what are called the four great elements. So fire, water, earth, and wind, right? And all of those are said to exist in any atom. Uh, and so the physical atom can then conceptually be deconstructed into those components, and those are the dharmas, the baseline bedrock of reality. Um, so that is the basic Abhidharma account. Um, That's not to say that every dharma is the same, that all dharma, that all the world is made of all of the same stuff, that there's some sort of single thing. And Derek just referenced the list of different mental factors. So we also have different form factors. Um, and these different lists of the basic components uh, are different in different systems. So some systems have 100, another have 82. Um, but the point being that there's sort of a periodic table in the Abhidharma system of real existence, who do not depend on anything for their existence, and out of which the world that we occupy is built. Um, I've been using this atomistic metaphor, but I think it's really important, and Westerhoff makes this point that the dharmas are not exclusively physical, like we normally think of atoms, but are sort of psychophysical components. So there are mental dharmas and there are form dharmas, and then there are also unconditioned dharmas, which importantly is enlightenment, nirvana, is said to be an unconditioned dharma. And then other systems have space as another type. Um,
So
any questions? Yeah.
can you sort of fast forward us to the part three, the argument from causation to emptiness? So I
Yeah.
think that's to the crux of the issue.
Sure. And I'll just read this first paragraph and then the premises below. So this is on page 8 of 18. The Madhyamaka, so we're jumping ahead to Madhyamaka, right? After just talking about Abhidharma. The Madhyamaka presents no master argument for its claims of universal emptiness. That is, for the claim that all things without exception lack intrinsic nature or swabhava. Nevertheless, the argument for causation clearly occupies a central role amongst the different arguments for emptiness we find in Madhyamaka literature. Put very simply, the argument runs as follows. Premise 1. To possess intrinsic nature means to exist outside the network of dependence relations. I'll read that again. To possess intrinsic nature means to exist outside of the network of dependence relations. Premise 2, if something is an effect, it existentially depends on a cause. Conclusion, nothing that is caused can possess intrinsic nature. It is obvious why this argument should occupy such a central place, and the majority of things we interact with on a day-to-day basis are caused. If we are able to establish that all these things are empty, we have advanced a big step towards showing that all objects are empty. So the Abhidharmikas are going to accept, are going to have issue with these premises that the Madhyamaka puts forth. In particular, they seem to reject premise number 1. To possess intrinsic nature means to exist outside of the network of dependence relations. So we talked about certain dependence relations that they have to exist outside of, Mariological, sort of a parts-based dependence, and conceptual dependence. But there is the belief that the dharmas exist only in the present moment and cause dharmas in the following moments. And so dharmas can be caused without that compromising them existing by swabhava, existing by their own independent nature, intrinsic nature. Any questions so far about this sort of framework that's being put forward? All right.
I had
Yeah.
not so much a question as sort of a mental breakdown in the face of all of this. Um, and I'm really not quite sure how to talk about it, but the idea of those premises, for instance, um, I mean, I don't know where to start with this. I guess to start with, for me, when somebody says Madhyamaka, I think of the Mula Madhyamaka Karika.
Mhm.
That is sort of a thing. And then everything else seems to be like sort of commentary on that or implications of that, which is for reasons maybe I'll mention, is a strange thing to do. But what I take that thing, that one document, Shastra, to be doing is to be saying, these are all of the ways that you can try to explain, comment on, describe, uh, do something with bare experience, just to have some attempt to do something with it, to shape it, to understand it, and that's fundamentally dualist. And it's saying any of those attempts is not going to work because there is only bare experience. So, on its own terms, all of those attempts fail. And that's what the karikas do, is it just goes one to the next. And interestingly, the first one is nothing has ever been caused. So certainly, maybe other Madhyamikas do this, but in the Mula Madhyama Karika, he's not saying that causation proves anything because he's saying there is no causation.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is happening there is that he's saying, what I take Westerhoff to be saying is, obviously there's cause and effect. Obviously Buddhists believe in that. This is how the Abhidharma explains it. The Madhyamaka approach undermines that, says no, that doesn't work. That's inherent in, I'm sorry, not inherently, internally inconsistent. It doesn't work. And so what he's saying, so how does the Madhyamaka explain the experience of cause and effect otherwise? And I think the point there is that it doesn't, and there, cause and effect, like anything else, is empty. Cause and effect is an imposition on our experience. It's something we project onto it. It's certainly not something that Nagarjuna at least took as a given, or even took as established. In fact, he took nothing as established, not even emptiness. There was no establishing all of that, and sort of I spun out from there to just the very fact of what Westerhoff is trying to do. All of the attempt to explain something is itself a form of dependence and a form of cause and effect. Any excellent words, words point at this, words mean this means that, this leads to this leads, all of that is null and void if the Mula Madhyamaka Karika is correct. So I mean, Westerhoff's whole project just seems silly to me. And it, particularly in the way that Bhavavika was also, he was trying to take what is a fundamentally, not even, it's anti-philosophy, anti-logic. It's just, you can't use these ideas that humans have developed over the millennia, philosophy, logic, language, meaning, etc. You can't use them because they're internally inconsistent, all of them. And so to then say, okay, I'm going to take that and I'm going to restate that in terms of the current philosophy, whether it's Bhavaveka doing it in terms of Golden Age Indian philosophy or Westerhoff doing it in terms of current Western philosophy. It's just to fundamentally dismiss what it's saying. And just, it's impossible. I mean, it just doesn't, I just got really confused by that, and really, and I mean, I think the important thing is then, okay, so it's easy enough to say, okay, so Nagarjuna has proven that there's only experience and there's nothing meta, nothing dualistic that can be sustained on that in an internally coherent fashion. Okay, what do I do with that on a day-to-day basis? Because the thing is, I haven't had that realization in like in like an awakening sort of way. I just understand that intellectually. I can, because I'm saying it in words. Um, there is obviously a conventional path that's supposed to get us from here to there. And so the way I think about it is the Mula Yambaka Karika leaves you without anything you want to act on or with. And being left in that spot is not something that we're prepared for. And so there's a conventional path, I guess, that can help you get to that. But it's like sort of already knowing where you're going makes it very hard to get there. I remember when I was studying at Shambhala, sort of very early on, well, not but fairly early on, saying that it all felt like they're describing this place that we're going to go to. And they're telling us, this is the room and this is the color it's painted and this is where the chairs are and the desks are and the tables are and all that stuff. But when you get there, it won't exist. And it's like, so why am I learning what color the walls are? So so I just kind of snapped. And that's where it left me.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that, Morgan. That's
Sure.
like,
Yeah, that's pretty neat. That intense snap experience. Cool.
I think that's
How
sort of the
were
idea,
you?
isn't it?
Yeah, were you like groundless for quite some time?
Um, no, I mean, I got to that and I said, I can't do anything with that, and then just went on to something else. Because it's like I can't function in that state. I can't. I mean, not. It's not even like a state I glimpse. I can't do anything with that understanding, because it's just an understanding.
But the understanding actually acts as like a a block to doing something. In order to re-engage with so-called day-to-day reality, you have to like take up the re-believe in things.
Well, yeah, which is very easy to do because that's actually what I'm doing. That the problem is
Habitual.
not just the day to day stuff, the mundane of washing the dishes, making dinner, and all that stuff. I know that. That's my actual experience. What I don't know is the path, the things to do on the path that lead me to actually having that realization, as opposed to just sort of explaining it or having it explained to me. And so there's nothing I can do with that in terms of walking the path.
Funny,
Symphony.
as you're describing this, it sort of made me think it's a little bit like koan practice.
Yeah.
That
And
it's
I mean, and part of this may have to do with I've been spending a lot of time at a Zen center here, and they have no patience for any of this kind of stuff. They're just like, stop, sit, think. Don't have an opinion. Don't have thoughts. Don't I mean? Well, you can have them. You're gonna have them, but they're just the thing that's happening. And so if you try to explain these things, they get very impatient.
They don't want to delve into it at all. It's total
Well, and
bullshit
I
for
think
them.
I think because they think it's a distraction. It's building something. It's building something up that you're
Unnecessary.
only going to have to tear down later.
is that
Well,
particular center one that does or does not follow the koan type of thing?
they do koans.
They do.
I'm not at that level
Right,
or
right.
anything, but they do. Yes, they do koan practice.
Right, because it's sort of interesting. I don't, I haven't done much with koans. Occasionally, I bump into them in various contexts. I've been doing something with the Tricycle Meditation Month has been using koans, so that's why it's sort of fresh in my mind. And so it's funny though because it does kind of give you this mental obstacle almost, where and the funny thing is, of course, you have to also understand in one sense that it's not about finding the answer, you
Mhm.
know, and that's of course frustrating too. And so it does leave you kind of in this state of nowhere to go. Uh, but it reminded me of this other Zen story of this guy who was given some kind of a koan. He couldn't answer it, so he left the monastery and sort of ran off and realized he was a failure. And then, like years later, after sweeping and doing ordinary things and living ordinary life, he had an enlightenment experience based on just some rock hitting a tree or something, and suddenly he kind of got it, and he immediately when he left the monastery, the, he had sort of asked the teacher to tell him the answer, and the teacher said, "Well, you won't thank me later if I do that." So then he went off and, so he had this experience, and then he stopped everything, kind of cleaned himself up, set up the shrine, lit incense, faced the direction of where that teacher was, and bowed, because he really understood how that teacher, was right, that it does not help to give the answer, right?
Yeah.
You have to find it in some crazy way.
So the interesting thing is that you were left with either like just a gap, a big gap experience, or just coming back to your normal life, washing the dishes.
Yeah.
And there was no like way to bridge that gap.
Right.
And that theoretically is the purpose of all this other stuff, is a way to bridge that gap.
Mhm. Yeah, because
So
it's so easy to read like all that Abhidharma stuff and be like, this is crazy. Like all the, there's this many different versions of this and they affect that, and it's like, well, this is on its face. This just is crazy. But at the same time, those folks were a lot further down this path than I am.
so then on the other hand, when we go back, so then you went back to washing dishes and doing X, Y, and Z that we're comfortable with or habitually oriented towards. Um, that's the same thing that the Abhidharma people are doing.
Mhm.
We're like buying back into the whole cobweb of views, basically.
Well, I wonder if, and I don't know what their situation was like then, but if they were starting out without this picture of where you end up that's been described to us, because we've seen the Mula Ben Yamakarika, they hadn't yet, and they hadn't seen things like that. So they didn't know where they were going. It seems plausible to me that they were just paying more and more and more attention to their experience. And our
But they
sort
had
of
a,
and our intrinsic reaction to doing that is to try to explain it and describe it and break it down and analyze it. And
but
so they were
they
sort
were
of move,
given.
so they were moving in that direction, but they just didn't get there.
But they also had a sense of path, right?
Oh, they had a tremendous sense of the
They
Oh
had
yeah,
the,
yeah, yeah.
metaphysical, where
arhats,
they were
and
supposed
there's
to get to arhats. They had examples all around them.
Right,
so
but their arhathood was not empty in the way that a bodhisattva's Buddhahood is.
How do
no,
you know that the experience was different and it wasn't just the way it was described?
I don't. I'm guessing. I'm totally
Well, why
guessing.
project that? Why project that?
I mean,
Why
just
guess that?
based on what I've read of how they describe their situation.
The
I mean,
arhats?
The
what they're
people
talking
who,
about
at
is
least the people who talked about arhats, like you read the older, the original Tripitaka, the sutras and stuff, and this person attained enlightenment and they became a stream enterer, and there's a lot of discussion of that, but it's not just at least it's not described and so not available to people who come after as being empty.
well, isn't it?
You
I
may
mean,
have that experience when you get there.
aren't they talking about emptying out all of the sort of kleshas and all
All
of
the
that?
outflows. Their
I
whole
mean,
scheme is they use the
that's
language
an
of
emptying.
outflow.
Right, but they're positing that there is a thing that exists that you need to empty yourself of. That's not
Well, I mean, granted, it's a different view. I mean, we do accept that, but I think it's a little extreme to say that there's no emptiness involved. It's
no,
just
I'm sorry, I don't mean to I'm saying that the notion of emptiness as it's derived from the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, a particular meaning of that and a particular way that can be understood, wasn't described at that time in
right.
any literature that still exists.
They
I
had a
think
They
different.
may
that
have
the Mahayana take is that the earlier schools had the emptiness of persons, uh, whereas the Mahayana schools add to that the emptiness of phenomena.
right, but even that notion, it's like, okay, so there's persons and phenomena. No, there's just emptiness.
Right,
They're still drawing
but
distinctions.
for the Abhidharmakas, they're still existing within some sort of realist ontology.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
there are
absolutely.
still dharmas
Hmm.
that exist in relationships, including causality, and as you say earlier, Nagarjuna will have none of that.
Right.
I want to make a case, and this is I'm just sort of basing this on my own experience, but making a case for knowing the answers to the test before you take it, or the koan, or having the Mulabhadyama Kakarikas as a text you work with, rather than just diving into your own experience. Um, Very few of us have achieved realized the Muladhyamika Karikas. You probably no one in this room, unless you're being very sneaky. But they can they can be a very powerful mirror uh, to look at ourselves through. We study them and we learn the arguments for why all sorts of things can't exist, why anything can't exist the way we think it does. And then we sit down on our cushion and are convinced that our experience that we're having is real. Um, and if you know that it's not real, but you're realistic with your own um, experience, your own belief that it is real, you can sort of pair those things together and get a really clear picture of what you're hanging on to. So I sit on my cushion and I have a belief that the thought that I'm having is substantial. Um, But then I remember, because I've read and studied the Yamakagarikas, that it isn't substantial. And then I have to sit with, okay, where am I placing that notion of substance? Where is that? And let me sort of like drill into that, not in a conceptual way, but in what I'm actually experiencing on the cushion. And that can, at least in theory, help undermine it and help get us to realizing experientially the Mula Madhyamaka.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that probably has a lot to do with why people do 3-year retreats, because you really have to dig into that for a long, sustained and just sit with it. Because, my sort of my initial reaction is, so I sit on the cushion and I have a thought, and the only experience I have is the thought. I don't have the bare awareness that precedes that. And and I can say to myself, and I can even make the argument as to why, that thought is empty, but that doesn't change my experience of it in any way.
It doesn't allow you to let go of it easier.
No,
You sure?
I, well, it's kind of hard to A/B test, so I don't know for sure. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, maybe over time I do take things less seriously and do cling less, but it's in such a marginal fashion compared to the just totalizing radicalness of what this actually is saying.
Well, can you apply the karakas so you go back to washing dishes and there are no dishes, they're not dirty, they're not clean, and it begins to sound like a Zen koan. Can't basically the karakas sound like a Zen koan
Yeah.
when you read them. And can you apply that sort of a same approach to your experience as you're doing your experience?
Yeah,
There
I
are no
mean,
thoughts, there's no
I think
mind.
they're a little bit, maybe just a little bit different than koans, because a koan is saying something in language, and it's referring to things that it's assumed the person studying the koan will have some knowledge of. And
The koans are
whereas the
based on a
karakas,
turning, they're
I'm
based
sorry.
on a turning, koan practice is based on the point of turning around
Yeah. I
of the
mean,
mind.
I guess the sort of superficial difference I see is the karakas aren't saying anything. They're saying, if you believe in these things, here's why that's internally
And
inconsistent.
that's the turnaround. Every
Right.
line is a turnaround.
Right. Yeah. And so so it gets to the same place. It's just a slightly different, but yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, practically it does sort of go the same way.
So, just keep applying that when you engage in any other part of your life, including philosophy. Cynthia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say that you're right about this. It is difficult, and I think we have to have a lot of kindness for ourselves as we struggle with it. I think rather than think, there's something wrong here, you're absolutely correct. It's very difficult. And in some ways, it does feel like we're sort of, banging our heads. I mean, I can see the emptiness of thoughts, but I can turn around and bang my head into or stub my toe or just step on the floor and say, this is solid. And I can't believe that it's not. So I think that's the whole reason why this is not a necessarily an instantaneous realization that we're going to get. It's something that we have to kind of wear out over time. And
Yeah.
so I really just, I encourage you to, have Maitri for what is the patience of being able to work with these advanced teachings is one of the uh, paramitas, right? One of the
Mhm.
Yeah,
extensions of the
patiently
paramita.
enduring the uncreated nature of reality.
Yeah, I mean that's why I think they included that in patience is that this is exactly how difficult it is that they actually included that in the paramita of patience, patience with ourselves trying to grok this stuff.
And also I think this is why it's fundamentally a practice and not a study.
Right, right.
Yes,
And the practice is bridging the gap. Like there's this understanding of letting go, of going off the cliff when you really understand emptiness. And then there's the world all around us all the time. And how do we bridge those two experiences?
Yeah.
Where to some extent you said you feel like I have to believe that dishes are dirty in order to clean them.
Yeah.
So how can you believe in them without believing in them?
Yeah.
and
And
sometimes sorry,
I was just gonna say, and what you were saying about being kind to yourself. I mean, it's not that I'm angry with myself or anything. I'm just kind of overwhelmed by the perspective. I mean, I remember saying at Shambhala once, it sort of feels like on the one hand, I'm moving forward, but on the other hand, the path is getting insanely longer as I do. And so it's like I'm actually
Yeah,
getting
of
further away.
course. That's right. You're really realizing how much longer it is.
Yeah.
So my first thought was, oh, sorry, it is.
well, I
But
just also was going to say
first,
there's also this sort of an accidental or serendipitous quality that you know it may not come through. We try logically to find ways to make sense out of like Derek's saying with the dishes or whatever it may be. But sometimes it's not going to come through logic. It's going to be that sandal that hits you in the face or the dog barking or the all of the many stories. It's like
Or
each
someone
one of us
slapping you with a sandal.
right. So it's like we don't know what random thing is going to be our particular way in,
Yeah.
and so we just have to kind of keep an open mind rather than a fixed mind as much as we can, as hard as it
a-
is.
and so that's why they have the scheme of wisdom and skillful means. That wisdom gives you little glimpses that don't last, don't have any impact. And skillful means processes your habitual patterns to the point where over time continued glimpses have an impact. And so like why did Nagarsha write other texts after that one? You made the point, you
Did
touched on
he?
it earlier. Supposedly there's all these
Yeah.
texts like I was like, why did he write other things after this one? It should have been like the end of the story. And then
Yeah, I think we should have a little more, not just patience, joy in it. Like are we supposed to relax and experience it, like watching a sunset, right? And enjoying the beauty of the thoughts and the emotions, like to me the Abhidharma is like a color wheel. Like when I learned all about color study, color theory, it's what happens to your eyes is kind of the same thing with the thoughts. And so, um, yeah, not being attached so much to the theory, right? Just like relax and enjoy it. It's fun, right? It can be fun, even though sometimes you might get a pain or something. But I don't want to say the
Thank
word
you.
fun.
I love the color wheel analogy for the Abhidharma schemes.
Yeah, I mean,
So I want,
Dharma is gorgeous for me because it's the same, it's giving me the same intellectual and emotional abilities that I learned from color study and the color wheel. There's no real blue or anything. There's no real red. There's so many different elements, and even colors you see through. You see through. There's transparent. There's no such thing as any of it, but it's there.
how
Right?
many colors are there? That was a trick question. Sorry.
What is it, 252 Pantone colors? 200 something Pantone colors. That's,
I wanted to go back to something that Morgan said early on that comes back to the article briefly, which is that I think he said something like the idea of phenomena being caused is often used as a logic for demonstrating or understanding emptiness of dharmas. If there's
I said that's
causation,
what Westerhoff was saying. Yeah.
and then you made the point. Nagarjuna's very first chapter is that there is no causation.
Yeah.
And so he comes about to emptiness in a very different way. And I thought that was really a great observation.
Yeah, well, that's like it's the notion that, there's different places along the way that they pull the rug out from under your feet. And, so first they make it that, oh, things don't exist, but there's this causality thing. And then they pull the causality rug out from under your feet, and it's like, I guess,
Step by step,
parts,
yeah.
Yeah,
of,
Wherever you
the
last.
karikas are kind of like a stack of rugs,
Goes,
and they just pull one after another, after another, after another, till there's none left.
right. I mean, I was walking down the street going somewhere, thinking I was going somewhere, and I'm coming up to the curve and I'm thinking, oh yeah, I think I'm going to wherever, I was going to the Deleg meeting actually. So I'm walking over to Pam's, and here I am going, and I had a flash of Nagarjuna at that moment, realizing, okay, I'm not really going, and how does this, and so I was sort of trying to integrate there is no going, and yet I'm going. I think that's the way we do it, is just whatever little flashes of experience we can have. And eventually something is going to kind of click to where we really fully experientially understand it, whereas right now it's still in the conceptual realm.
I think the basic strategy is that we have a very fixed structure for visualizing or picturing our world and ourselves. But we don't realize how fixed and strong and defined that structure is. It has a vague quality to it, and that the whole like Abhidharma project and so forth, is a way of heightening and isolating and identifying the structure of conceptual fabrication that we all buy into, so that you can see it clearly. And the ultimate result of that is that it all falls apart. But the falling apart we experience in various glimpses, that because the habitual pattern is so strong, unless you're able to get to the root of the issue, it just comes back in the next moment or two.
Could I just add
So
something that,
you need some way to get to gradually get to the root of the problem. Cynthia.
yeah, it's interesting because that kind of goes back to how the Abhidharma, even though we think of it in one sense as being less sophisticated because we know there's more that comes later, but they do start the process of, helping to understand the momentariness of experience and things like that, which is not our normal experience. The notion of just, you know, moment after moment after moment, and it's not all tied together. That's a lot, that's a big deal.
Yeah, the whole project is a much finer grained understanding of experience than we normally have.
Yeah,
Much finer grained
yeah,
Right. Well,
in
that's
many
the
different
process
dimensions.
is refining it, is
Yeah.
refining what we're not aware of, but we're accepting. We're tacitly accepting
yeah. So
that
even though
free.
they didn't have it, all the way to the full level of emptiness, they did have a big chunk that is probably beyond
Yeah.
where, most of our experience
Yes. Yeah.
is day to
Yeah.
day.
And one of the fascinating things is that this whole idea of a partless particle and a moment of time that had no chronological thickness, and somehow they believed that that was a valid way of understanding
Yeah,
and
that
letting,
you could somehow build things with parts or duration out of components that had none.
yeah, yeah,
But you see, but you what I mean, it's so easy to talk about. We use the word clunkiness a lot last semester. The clunkiness of these different projects, and um, but I think the point is, and to sort of riff on Derek's point about the Abhidharma is moving our vague realist notions into more concrete realist notions. And the point that is sort of made is that this sort of clunkiness is unavoidable. If you are going to think that there's a real world out there, these are some of the bullets you're going to have to bite. And it may not be these exact ones. Maybe there's a modern metaphysical theory that you're going to subscribe to that the Abhidharmikas hadn't considered. But any sort of realist notion of time, of causality, is gonna have this clunkiness, this uncomfortableness at the bottom of it. Um, and all of us, our default mode is realism. And being aware of the commitments that come with that can really help undermine it.
The one thing I find myself thinking about sometimes with the Abhidharma is they never contend with the idea of energy, which physics has sort of broken everything down to now. And the implication of that is like an atom. You take an atom is some packets of energy that are moving in empty space. And you can actually build solid objects out of something that is not a solid object and it has no solidity to it. You actually can do that.
I think I've been coming to feel that that conclusion is partly because of the language barrier, and that the way they understood partless particles is
Mhm.
actually very much what we call energy.
Mm.
That those ultimate elements of earth, water, fire, air, those are energetic forces, and they're
But,
not static, pieces of whatever.
but like I guess it's actually not them, but the argument against them where they say like if you have something in it and it has any mass to it or any it takes up any volume or anything, there's a left and a right, and either the other particles that form the greater thing have to touch it. And that's not true. That's not how atoms work. They don't touch each other.
But they
And
didn't
that's
have
what
the
the
But
equipment to
Abhidharma
figure that
said.
out then.
That's what the Abhidharma said. They said they call them partless particles, and
Right.
that's their way of describing that. Yeah, they don't touch. There's no space between them, but they
Oh no,
don't
there is
touch.
space between them. They just don't touch.
well, I think the problem, whether or not you're describing a particle or a wave, the idea is that it has some sort of positionality. It occupies
Mhm.
a point in space, and that point is going to have like one side of there's a right side and a left side to it. It's not one dimensional. It's three dimensional, and the Abhidharmika or the Madhyamaka critique is going to be, well, then it's not partless.
So
It's
then,
not dimensionless.
So like how would I mean, if you're talking though about these waves and obviously nothing's staying in place for any particular length of time, it would be interesting to look at what the Madhyamaka critique of, how we get solid tables and chairs out of, waves and energy like that. But
Anyway, so
different layers of subtlety, right?
I think the idea, the skillful means of the Buddhist path is that by studying our experience, we challenge our habitual misperception of our situation more and more deeply, more and more repeatedly, and in different ways. And so the Abhidharma does that in one way, and the Madhyamaka reaction, or the Madhyamaka tradition, is basically a reaction to the Abhidharma version of understanding right view and bringing right view into practice in order to transform understanding, behavior, and experience. And so the next wave of Buddhism in India, I think, takes a very different approach to the situation. And so that's what we'll enter into in this course. And the reading that we had for tonight just barely touched on the ideas. It was somewhat of a litany of names of individuals and texts, just to sort of start to get used to the names of texts and teachers that we're going to encounter in this segment of the course. And we'll quickly get, it's sort of like the idea was, well, let's read the source text first before we read like Westerhoff's understanding of the Yogacara philosophy, or what right view is for Yogacara, and other versions of that. Let's start with the main source materials, which are the Lankavatara Sutra and the Samdhinirmochana Sutra, and see how those texts express the understanding of reality and how to work with the difference between that presentation of reality and our current one. And then we'll go into the major teachers and pretty much touch on a lot of, if not like almost all of the major texts of the tradition in this course of the Yogacara and Buddha nature traditions.
Should we pull up our current draft of the syllabus?
Yeah. Did you see the one I circulated
Yeah. Do you
just
want me
now?
to?
Sure, if you have that handy.
Yeah, let me
And
bit.
just before that goes up, the three main concepts that we'll encounter are this idea of mind only, which is somewhat an evolution of this idea of partless particles and timeless moments of time, and other Abhidharma problems as described in Getlin's text. The expansion of consciousness from 6 levels to 8 levels, and the idea of a base or all container consciousness, the Alaya Vijnana. And instead of 2 levels of reality, conventional, relative, and ultimate, we have what's called the 3 natures. And we'll see how those are presented. And I think one of the most marked things that we'll experience is that the way the texts, the language of the text is just so different. It's just so different from Nagarjuna's deconstruction, from the Abhidharma project that is basically deconstructionist. And it just takes a totally different approach towards understanding, and refining our understanding. So yeah, let's just do a quick little run through of the syllabus, Chris.
Is this coming up for everyone?
No.
No. Okay. Let me try again.
Saw like the top band
Yeah. Here we go. How about that?
better.
All right, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. Um, Derek, why don't you walk us through this since this is sort of more your baby this semester?
Okay. And this is 13?
It's the one you just sent.
Just sent. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so after the review, which we talked about tonight, and the text that we circulated, the reading for tonight, which is I just described, we go into the source text of Lankavatara Sutra, which is entry into the land of Lanka, which is Sri Lanka. Was known as Ceylon for many years, but now back to Sri Lanka. And there was this mythology that the Buddha visited Sri Lanka. And one of the interesting things about both of these sutras, as with many sutras, is that they developed and changed over like a period of like 75 or 100 years, which was also seen in many of the Prajnaparamita texts, which is a fascinating thing of like how to, we have that statement by the scholars who write these articles that these sutras changed over time. So what does that mean? That they apparently have different versions of these sutras that present different information, different number of chapters, different versions of those chapters, and they get that primarily by Chinese pilgrims traveling to India and bringing back versions of these sutras to China and then them being translated. And the Chinese were very good about, because of their dynasty system of identifying their time period, whereas, so we know, okay, this pilgrim traveled to India and came back, Xuanzang, in what, a certain year, and so this is the version that he found, and then the next guy came and found a different version. They see that change, and then they see a third guy comes back with basically the same version, and there's no change. I think is what that process is involved. And you might think like, so we're in our lifetimes of 50, 75 years or whatever that happens to be for all of us. You know, it's like thinking that like a famous book comes out and like 20 years later, there's a totally different version of that book that comes out. And then another 20 years later, there's another completely different version of that book. And they're all attributed to somebody that lived hundreds of years ago. Anyway, we'll then dive into
The
this.
Lankavatara Sutra is sort of notoriously messy in this way, isn't it?
Thank you. Yeah, the Lankavatara is just really spotty, just like choppy. It's just like a mishmash of different topics, just one after another. And it very much is an amalgamation of different time periods. There's like clearly chapters added onto it at the end that are just totally different from the flow of the main body of the text. Whereas the Samdhinirmochana has a lot greater integrity, sort of from a literary point of view in that text. And we get, by the way, for the Lankavatara, we get the translation from the Chinese tradition. Nobody has yet done a translation from the Tibetan version of it, which is somewhat different, apparently. Then we have Westerhoff's overview of the key Yogacara concepts. And then we have a couple more. We have this current, the author of the document that we had circulated for tonight, overview of the key concepts. And one of the things that I actually like about this version is that the language is so weird and archaic that I think it challenges you to try to like understand how powerful our projection of words like idealism and monism this guy uses this term monism for the Yogacara tradition, which is a totally bizarre term, but I think it sort of makes us think, like, in what way are they calling it that? In what way is that like absurd? But it is sort of archaic. But and then we have a text from Karl Brunholzl. Many of us have seen before, where he does this wonderful overview of the five dharmas of Maitreya, and in there he goes through an overview of the main elements of the Yogacara tradition. And so there's a lot of pages of that one, but the pages are very small, so I sort of chopped them in half. One of the things that you can see we're struggling with is that some classes still have too many pages, which is why we're not ready to put this out. We're going to chop them down. Then we drop into Maitreya's main Yogacaras texts. A little overview of the couple of texts of his five dharmas that are universally held to be Yogacara texts of his five dharmas. These two are held to be the key Yogacara texts. The Madhyanta Vibhaga is the distinction between middle and extremes, or the analysis of middle and extremes. And then the Dharma Dharmata Vibhaga, the analysis or distinction between dharmas, things, and their essence, their nature. And then we have excerpts from those texts. The first one, Madhyanta Vibhaga, with commentaries by Mipam and a gentleman named Kempo Shenga, the famous chapter 1 of that text. And then we have the text of the Dharma Dharmata Vibhaga, which is very short. A number of these texts are quite short, and this one is very short. It's just like, 6 pages approximately. So we look at the source text from the Buddha, from Maitreya, who, as Chris Dillon mentioned earlier, is fiercely debated, like, was he a real person, Maitreya? And there's actually 3 options. One is that, he's the future Buddha, and he taught these texts to a Sangha after a Sangha spent 12 years in retreat, focused on Maitreya, which tells us that, okay, there was a tradition of trying to experience Maitreya in meditation. And so he went on a meditation retreat for 12 years. It's like saying, I'm going to go on a Vajrayogini retreat for 12 years, or a Medicine Buddha retreat for 12, and try to achieve union or connect with this manifestation of enlightened mind. Maitreya is said to be the next Buddha, so he's on the 10th bhumi, and he hangs out in a special place, the batter's box, so to speak, for the Buddhahood position. And he teaches the Sangha these 5 texts up in Tushita heaven, and the Sangha comes back and writes commentaries on them and teaches them to his brother Vasubandhu and a number of other people. Another version is that Maitreya maybe was a human and was the teacher of a Sangha, just like a Sangha, a human being. Another option is that it was an epithet for a Sangha himself, and that he wrote these texts. And he sort of had this habit of like a pen name, of like sometimes he would write under the name of Maitreya, and sometimes under a Sangha.
So you said these are the Yogacara texts of Maitreya. Did he write other texts that we might look at?
Yeah, so Maitreya has the 5 dharmas of Maitreya. And so I've given the numbers 3 and 4, and in Carl's text, these are numbered and usually given in this order, where there's 2 Vibhangas. These are both have the term Vibhanga analysis in them. And text number 1 and 2 of Maitreya both have the word lamp, alamkara, which is these sort of um, what do you call it? Let's see, I can't think of the term. It's alamkara is the ornament. That's it. It's a term for ornamentation, like earrings and Christmas tree orientation, ornaments, things like that. They were big on Christmas tree ornaments. But the first two texts are ornaments, and the first one is the ornament of higher realization, a text called Abhisamaya Alamkara, which is the ornament of higher realization. It goes through the Bodhisattva path from A to Z and from up and down in all different ways. And it's a condensation of the 25 and 100,000 line Prajnaparamita sutras in an amazing way, because those sutras are obviously very long, as you can tell by the titles. And his text is basically 30 pages. And it has this, in its verse, and it has packed in it all of this information that's then unpacked in like 72 points and 144 subsidiary points. The commentators have this whole way of laying it out. That's pretty amazing. The second one is called the Mahayana Sutra Alamkara, which is the ornament of the Mahayana Sutras. And it's basically excerpts from a wide range of Mahayana Sutras that were available at the time and arranged thematically and topically, primarily along the lines of like the paramitas and things like that. And so here we have these two, and then go into a Sangha. We have excerpts from two of his autonomous, is that what you call them? Autonomous works, as opposed to works that are commentaries on Maitreya's texts, which he wrote a number of. But these are works that are not commentaries. The Bodhisattva Bhumi is the stages of the Bodhisattvas. So it's a description of the Bodhisattva path, which is the same topic as the Mahayana Sutra Alamkara, which is just a concatenization of sutra excerpts. But the Bodhisattva Bhumi is more of a prose analysis of the Bodhisattva path. And we have a little excerpt from a section on the nature of reality from that book. And the Bodhisattva Bhumi is actually translated the entire thing into English, which is phenomenal these days. That came out a few years ago. As all the dharmas are now of Maitreya are now available in translation, which makes this course possible. And it's part of this massive compilation called the Yogacara Bhumi that has all these different sections, and it's like the Mahavibhasha of the Abhidharmakas, which was massive text, thousands of pages long. The Yogacara Bhumi is this, the Bhumi is stages or grounds of the Yogacara tradition, and has the Bodhisattva Bhumi in it. And the other most famous chapter of that, or section of that text, is the Shravaka Bhumi. It goes through the stages of the Shravaka, the Hinayana practitioner, in great detail. And in that book, Sangha lays out the whole system of meditation that we receive, of the 9 stages of shamatha and the 6 obstacles and antidotes and all that fun stuff. And so, unfortunately, that is not translated. That would be a huge benefit if that was translated. Mahayana Samgraha is like Karl Brunholz told me, that's his best text. It's this really wonderful sort of medium-sized text on the Mahayana, the theories of, or view of Mahayana from the Yogacara tradition. It's the term Samgraha means a compilation of the Mahayana, or compendium, as he translates it, a compendium. and he just goes through all the major ideas of the Yogacara in that text. And we have a little excerpt, The Foundation of What Is to Be Known, which is a common thing we saw in Maitreya's Madhyanta Vibhanga, the Middle Beyond Extremes, Chapter 1, the characteristics. So the excerpts from Asanga's works are similarly focused on the nature of reality, basically. And then we have Vasubandhu. Vasubandhu's main Yogacara text. Now, Vasubandhu is also famous for the Abhidharma Kosha, the treasury of Abhidharma, which is his presentation of the Vaibhashika system of Abhidharma. And he writes a commentary to it called the Bhashya in Sanskrit, so Abhidharma Kosha Bhashya. And the Bhashya, the commentary, takes the point of view of the Sautrantika tradition and caused a bit of an uproar with Vasubandhu's teachers at the time. Asanga subsequently converts, so to speak, Vasubandhu into the Yogacara Mahayana path. And Vasubandhu, when he realizes the truth of the Mahayana, he has great remorse because he's been down bad-mouthing Mahayana for many years and very skillfully arguing against Mahayana. And he's so upset that he's about to cut his tongue out for having created such bad karma. And Sangha says, no, we need that tongue. We need you now to present the Yogacara Mahayana point of view with that very eloquent tongue of yours. And so he writes a lot of texts. And these are the main philosophical ones. We went a number of years ago, we had a course on his text on the 5 skandhas, where it goes through in detail through the 108 dharmas, with a commentary by his student Stiramati. But these ones are very short. We have this 20 stanzas text, a text called 30 stanzas. They ran out of innovative titles, I guess, just like Nagarjuna has texts called the 60 stanzas and the 70 stanzas. He has a text on the 3 natures, which is one of the main ideas of the Yogacara tradition, alternative to the 2 truths. And then we have a nice presentation of Yogacara from a contemporary author, where he describes the structure of mind. It's basically a commentary on this text of the 30 stanzas, I think, where he describes the Alaya Vijnana and the evolution of the Alaya Vijnana in 3 stages into a full-blown experience of a sentient being. And then we go into this idea of there being a synthesis of Madhyamaka and Yogacara. And we're out of time, so just briefly, can you continue to scroll, Chris? Shantarakshita. So Madhyamaka Alamkara, adornment or ornament of the middle way. And it's a short text, so we actually read the whole text in 15 pages. And then there's a big commentary by Nipama. We'll delve a little bit into that. This class has too many pages, so we're going to cut down on the reading in that one. And he's trying to bring together Yogacara and Madhyamaka. And he's famous for bringing Buddhism from India into Tibet, establishing the monastic system, training translators, and trying to build the monastery of Samye, which met a lot of local opposition. He says to the king, you need like some heavy-duty dude, magician. I recommend Padmasambhava. And the rest is history, as they say. A colleague of his, Jnana Garba, writes a text on distinguishing the 2 truths from the Yogacara point of view. We'll take a look at that. And then we'll finish that section with analysis by Mark Sideridis on looking at the two different ways of looking at Madhyamaka and Yogacara. Some people look at Madhyamaka and Yogacara as completely discontinuous. Like there was one effort to understand the teachings of Buddha that went from Abhidharma to Madhyamaka, and there was another that went from Abhidharma to Yogacara. And those are completely different and independent. Another point of view is that there's continuity, and there's many traditions, including the Kagyu Nyingma, that basically look at that development as a continuity that went from Abhidharma to Madhyamaka to Yogacara. And so we'll see his take on that issue of continuity.
I love this essay because we're always given this picture that like, oh no, everyone gets along and it's all part of one system. And Mark Sedaris is like, nah, it ain't.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that is the picture we're giving of this continuity. It's the fundamental continuity argument, and we'll see it in the next chapter if you'll scroll down, where the difference between the three turnings of the Dharma of the Buddha, where some people say, well, there was the first one and that was superseded by the second one, and then the third turning was sort of backtracking for those who couldn't really deal with the second one. And then there's some traditions like ours that say that there was a progression from the first to second and third. There was an incremental progression. So we look at the Tathagata text, the Tathagata Sutra, and the famous Mahayana version of the Great Parinirvana Sutra. There's an earlier sutra by the same name called the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. That's very much more basic description of the last days of the Buddha and his death, called Mahaparinirvana. And this sutra is very different. It has a completely radical opposite point of view to the three marks or four marks of existence. And it gives the complete opposite: permanence, bliss, self, and something, purity or something. Then we get Maitreya's famous presentation of Tathagata in his, what's called in the Tibetan tradition, the Uttara Tantra. In the Indian tradition, it's known as the Ratnagotra Vibhaga, another analysis Vibhaga of the Ratnagotra. And I guess we end there. We're out of time. So you'll see the rest of it shortly. Comments, suggestions, questions? Very exciting. I can see the excitement on your faces.
I was just going to say, that actually sounds exciting. I was like, is there something wrong with me?
I think it's great. I'm totally excited about reading all these source texts from this other tradition, so to speak. And there was a couple that we didn't get to on screen. There's Maitreya's text on Buddha nature. There's a commentary on it, an Indian commentary on it. And then there's a little text by Nagarjuna, attributed to Nagarjuna, praise to Dharmadhatu. That's very much like a Tathagata text. And there's a little text about a little article about the three turnings of the wheel and which ones are considered to be provisional teachings versus definitive teachings. That is the endless argument in Tibetan Buddhism. So thank you very much for joining again, and look forward to doing this with you all, with Chris. And thanks for being here tonight. Have a good evening. Let's close with a dedication. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara. May I free all beings by the confidence of the golden sun of the great East. May the lotus garden of the victim's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Be well.
We'll see you next
soon.
week.
Thank you.